Hey everybody, welcome to the very first episode of Cosmic Conversations with Ben from Are They Really Here? A series in which I read chapters from a book that subject matter has to do with the phenomenon, UFOs, paranormal encounters, and extraterrestrials. The first book we're talking about today is The Cryptoterrestrials by Tonnies, a really interesting theory that is not discussed as much as the other theories surrounding the phenomenon are. This was live recorded on TikTok, so first off, I want to apologize for the lack of quality. Further episodes will have a much better quality. This was a test run, so I'm really happy to jump into it. So without further ado, let's read the book together. I'm going to read the foreword, which was written by Nick Redfern. It's only like 2 pages, and then I'll get into chapter 1. So. And again, we're reading Tonnies, The Cryptoterrestrials. So this is the foreword. As a result of its elusive, ever-changing, and I would strongly argue, seemingly stage-managed nature and appearance, the UFO phenomenon is one that should be firmly recognized by and appreciated for its many attendant uncertainties and complexities. After all, we should never forget that more than 60 years have elapsed since pilot Kenneth Arnold experienced his now historic encounter of the flying saucer kind over Mount Rainier in Washington state. And guess what? The U in UFO still stands for unidentified. Unfortunately, so many of those who have dared to immerse themselves within the ufological sandpit since the long-gone heady day in June 1947 have forgotten or stubbornly refused to acknowledge that stark fact. For those utterly belief-driven souls, the only answer to the ever-present UFO mystery that continues to intrude upon us at a collective and sometimes profoundly personal level is that the true unknowns have extraterrestrial origins. Yet the harsh reality is that the likes of the late J. Allen Hynek, Leonard Stringfield, Richard Hall, and countless other souls who became entranced by flying saucers in their forever elusive cruise were utterly unable to provide any hard evidence that ET really was or still is among us. For all their files and attendant filing cabinets, their carefully compiled notes, and their myriad interviews with numerous eyewitnesses, they failed to make a definitive case. That's right, they failed. Deal with it or don't, but it's a fact. I've been saying this. Now, one might reasonably ask, well, just because absolute vindication for the extraterrestrial hypothesis, ETH, has not yet been forthcoming, does that mean the same hypothesis has no merit? Of course not. However, in my view, if evidence for the ETH has failed to surface despite decades of hard work and diligent investigations, then maybe we should consider the notion that we are looking for the answers in all the wrong places. Instead of looking up, maybe we should be looking around us, and perhaps even below us too. Thankfully, there are a few learned scholars out there who recognize that what to some is a relatively straightforward matter, namely the idea that ET is visiting us, sometimes crashes and burns, and has a particular penchant for our DNA, is actually nothing of the sort. Enter Tonnies. I rather liken Mac to a Fortean equivalent of the Sex Pistols and the Ramones. Mac would prefer I cite the Smiths or REM, but hey, that's how it goes. When in 1976, both bands firmly saved rock music from the bloated stowage of groups like Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Yes, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, they didn't just do so because they could. No, their actions were prompted by the fact that A, the dinosaurs of rock and roll had utterly become irrelevant and redundant, and B, a new, fresh approach was sorely needed. Such is the case with the beliefs of many of the long-term players within ufology, who are, today, about as relevant to the actual subject matter as a pterodactyl or a woolly mammoth to the 21st century. Even a relative novice cannot fail to notice that the UFO issue has a distinct atmosphere about it that screams manipulation, deception, and stage-managed trickery. In other words, yes, there is a real UFO phenomenon, and it has nothing to do with Pentagon generals, CIA spooks, mistaken identity, or outright hoaxing and fakery, but it may have nothing to do with literal extraterrestrials either. What if there exists alongside us in distinct stealth a race of incredibly ancient beings who may be native to our planet, who were perhaps eons ago our technological masters, but who today may well be on the wane? What if, as a means to move against us, they have ingeniously passed themselves off as visitors from far-off worlds? And what if we, those of us who delve into the world of the UFO, and those who have encountered such entities have fallen for their Machiavellian ruses time and time again. Such are the questions that are at the heart of Tonnies, the Cryptoterrestrials. As Max skillfully demonstrates, UFOs and their shadowy crews most assuredly do, and their ties to us are both long-standing and vital. They want us to believe they are extraterrestrials. Arguably, they even need us to believe they are extraterrestrials, but in reality, they are merely Oscar-deserving actors, endlessly performing stage plays that have successfully kept the human race in the dark for countless generations. With the long-awaited publication of Tonnies, the Cryptoterrestrials, however, their era of deceit and manipulation may well be coming to a close, providing, that is, we do not continue to be seduced and enchanted by their cosmic lies. So I will start chapter 1, which is looking for aliens. So, looking down from a sufficient distance, human habitation recedes to the merest glimmer. As night devours the continents, our seeming dominion vanishes, replaced by scattered constellations. The haughty gleam of our city suddenly as substantial as a skein of campfires. As the dark deepens, we realize with mounting unease just how tenuous our presence is. The mountains, prairies, and lakes, denuded of daylight, taunt us with their enormity. Then there are the oceans, almost entirely vacant of man-made lights. Our seas, so often taken for granted, are like vast tombs from which even the most unseemly phantasms might emerge. We ply their waters at our own peril, distantly aware that we might find ourselves in the company of others. The Earth is ancient, its biosphere only slightly less so. For 4 billion years, our world has secreted life. The advent of Homo sapiens is alarmingly recent in comparison. We're like foundlings washed upon some alien shore, stifling our fears by pretending to be a feeble omnipods. Having launched spacecraft to the outer planets and inspected the crater-pocketed wastes of Mars through the unblinking eyes of rovers, it's easy to entertain the idea that we're the first, evolution's sole successful stab at the phenomenon we casually term intelligence. Yet as we watch night erode the familiar highways and stadiums and ever-encroaching suburbs, our confidence falters. Already, technological forecasters envision a near future populated by our artificially intelligent offspring. Perhaps as our most cherished certainties crumble in the glow of a new century, full of danger, portent, and enigma, it's become relatively easy to contemplate the presence of the other. Not an other new to our planet, but one predating our own genetic regime. Something unspoken and ancient, yet nevertheless amenable to science, an intelligence with an almost human face, until recently content to abide by the shadows of our complacency. But since the middle of our last centuries, it seems to have asserted itself with a vigor hitherto found only in the domain of folklore. Understandably daunted, we've relegated its existence to the margins of perception. Hallucination, war, fever, misunderstood natural phenomena, delusion, butchered recollections of dreams best left forgotten. We see lights dancing in our sky and invoke impossible meteors. Landed vehicles accompanied by surreal humanoids become military test aircraft in their diminutive pilots. The emaciated creatures seen aboard a parent spacecraft, or more portentously, within rock-walled caverns, are summarily dismissed as sheerest fantasy, or at best, as the spawn of novel brain dysfunctions. In the decades since 1947, dawn of the contemporary UFO era, we've confronted a parade of strangeness that has rallied uncritical enthusiasts and rattled entrenched authority, leaving a bizarre residue that defies attempts at categorization as certainly as it elicits hypotheses. I begin this book pursuing the commonalities between the UFO phenomenon and the equally bewildering spectacle of our emerging technological future. I was especially intrigued by the prospect of humans becoming something other than strictly biological, increasingly viewed as a necessary evolutionary step in the wake of an imminent singularity. A moment in history in which our intelligence, augmented and disseminated by machines, transcends to the imaginable. My working hypothesis, that alien visitation was best viewed in cybernetic terms, remains a valid paradigm for interpreting the arrival of an alien intelligence on this planet. But the more I read and contemplated, the more my post-biological theory seemed lacking. While I could readily envision a global invasion directed by unseen machine intelligence, the enduring nature of the UFO spectacle forced me to rethink my assumptions. Like ufologist Jacques Vallée, I viewed our response to the appearance of apparent non-human vehicles in the skies as the work of deliberate psychological conditioning, probably but not necessarily benevolent. Contrary to popular perceptions, UFOs are far from a recent occurrence. Written and oral accounts point to an experience of exceptional age and patience. If alien encounters were the work of some godlike artificial intelligence, an omniscient pacemaker sowing memes in an effort to ensure our evolution conform to some unknown alien ideal, then we might reasonably expect it to remain hidden. This would neatly account for the lack of hard evidence that would force the UFO question out of theoretical limbo and into the mainstream. A post-biological overseer, something along the lines of the inscrutable black monolith in 2001, which we also saw show up in Utah and recently Wales, would have vested interest in obscurity. As biological beings, we might even lack a perceptual acumen to properly discern its presence. This I reasoned explained the UFO's phenomenon recurrence in world folklore. Perhaps it had succeeded in insinuating itself into our collective unconscious. As abductee Whitley Strieber had suggested, alien contact, whatever alien might ultimately mean, might be what the process of evolution looks like to the human mind. The primary challenge in this mythological approach was the explicitly physical nature of so many encounters, including but by no means limited to the relatively recent epidemic of abductions, in which witnesses report being kidnapped from workaday surroundings, and subjected to novel medical tests. This seemed remarkably crude for an intelligence as subtle and abiding as the entity I had imagined. If recent developments in our own technology are any indication at all, we will probably harness much less intrusive techniques within the next few decades. For an intelligence thousands or millions of years superior to our own, to stoop to such clinical levels struck me as absurd. We're going to get back to this soon. Of course, the very idea of an artificially emplaced psychosocial conditioning system hinges on absurdity. Vallée and John Keel, author of the paranormal masterpiece The Mothman Prophecies, have written extensively on the nonsensical element that accompanies so many accounts of assumed extraterrestrial visitation. This absurdity only makes sense if the phenomenon isn't as it seems, but rather appeals to our collective unconscious, for reasons we can only guess. Or so I thought. Finally, I wondered the unthinkable. What if the antics of the absurd humanoids documented by Vallée weren't the work of some overarching intelligence? What if they happened just as reported, without the need to invoke externally imposed psychosocial thermostats? The notion struck me as deliciously ironic. Yeah, that's what we're reading about right now, kind of. Sorry, I just saw that. I had to respond. It suggested that the encounters with non-humans that haunt our folklore were real, not necessarily projections preying on our gullibility. Could fairies and elves and all their mythical successors be distorted representations of an actual species? While curiously appealing, the idea seemed totally orthogonal to science. Psychologists maintain that legendary little people are beings of the mind, the brain's instinctive attempt to populate darkness. They're also quick to point out that modern accounts of spindly gray aliens are almost certainly due to fantasy-prone personalities, poorly trained therapists, and hallucinations experienced during episodes of sleep paralysis. This analysis is attractive on several levels. It neatly does away with the specter of the other we repeatedly encounter in myths. It also assuages our fears that our world might be fair game for dispassionate ET scientists with their glittering probes and omnipotent saucers. Alas, it fails. This book documents a most unconventional slant on the enduring UFO mystery. In the Cryptoterrestrials, I attempt to reconcile mythological and contemporary accounts of little people into a coherent picture. In many ways, the image that emerges is at least as frightening as my original cybernetic premise. It's much closer to home, vastly less abstract, and tantalizingly amenable to scientific testing. I propose that at least some accounts of alien visitation can be attributed to a humanoid species indigenous to the Earth, a sister race that has adapted to our numerical superiority by developing a surprisingly robust technology. The explicitly reproductive overtones that color many encounters suggest that these indigenous aliens are imperiled by a malady that has, I'm not sure what that word means, that has gone uncured throughout the eons we have coexisted. Driven by a puzzling mixture of hubris and existential desperation, they seek to perpetuate themselves by infusing their gene pool with human DNA. While existing at the very margins of ordinary human perception, they have succeeded in realms practically unexplored by known terrestrial science, reinventing themselves at will and helping to orchestrate a misinformation campaign of awe-inspiring scope. Is the intelligence behind the close encounter experience using science-fictional devices as a way to interact with us, much how a primatologist communicates with an orphan monkey via hand puppet? If so, how to account for descriptions of bug-like entities from populations who haven't been primed to know what an alien should look like? Maybe the ubiquitous gray is simply a costume that works, in which case one can't help but yearn for a glimpse of next year's fashions. For too long, we've called them aliens, assuming that they may represent our planet's best and brightest. And maybe that's exactly what they want us to think. Hey everybody, thanks for watching the very first episode of Cosmic Conversations. I wanted to apologize once again for the lack of quality in this video. I promise next time the audio and the video quality will be much better. As well, I want the video to contain pieces of the conversation I have with some of the chat on live stream. So as I keep making these episodes, I promise you they will get better. Thanks for being patient and sticking around, and hope to catch you on the next video. And remember to keep asking yourselves, are they really here?